You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 65. This is the show where we break down the intersection between archaeology and technology and help your project go high tech. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. On today's show, we're talking about using tech in adverse conditions. With winter coming up, a lot of people might be dusting off their clipboards for the cold weather. We'll get into that and much more on this episode. Let's get to it. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Hi, Paul. How's it going?
Pretty good. How you doing, Chris?
Pretty good. So, as I think I've alluded to on other shows, I can't remember if it was this podcast or not, but winter is fast approaching. I think the high here in Reno is like 50 degrees on Friday, and we're having routine low temperatures at night in the 30s. As we're recording this, it's October 17th, so a little ways ago from when you're hearing this, but it's getting cold out, and that is an adverse weather condition, and we're going to talk about tech in adverse weather conditions. Paul, what's it doing in New York right now?
You know, we had the weirdest fall. It's been summer-like weather up until 2 nights ago, and at 2:30 in the morning, it all changed. Our apartment faces out over the Hudson River, so there's nothing between us and New Jersey, and 2:30 in the morning, bam, the whole house got woken up, the whole apartment, because it was like a wall of bricks hit us, and then the wind started howling, and it dropped a good 20 degrees, so now it's cold.
Nice. Fall came in with a
bang.
With a roar.
Literally.
Yeah, nice. Well, that can be pretty damaging sometimes for different technological things you might be using in the field, and that's what we're going to talk about on this show. Is my initial concept for the show was basically calling it winter tech, like what do you do in the wintertime as we're moving forward. But as Paul and I were taking notes, and I was talking to Paul a few days ago about this, it was kind of broadened out into just tech in adverse conditions. You know, I might focus on winter just a little bit because that's what's coming up for most people, but I mean, people, you know, you pull out your iPad and people put cases around these things, or any tablet you have, they put a case on it, they do all these things, and they treat them like, you know, they treat it like a precious little object, and they don't want to take it anywhere and do anything with it. And in some cases, that's probably true. Don't take your iPad underwater without putting a case on it. I mean, but that level of security is applicable in different degrees to lots of adverse conditions. So let's just talk about what those adverse conditions are, where you have to think about your technology just a little bit and think about protecting it in some way, even if it's just, physically shielding it from something, you still have to protect it. But so let's talk about what those are. Just going down the list here, and then we'll talk about them as we go along. You've got winter, which usually means cold. You've got summer, which usually means hot, but also means direct sunlight, but I'll talk about that later. You've got humidity issues, which usually has two factors involved. One, just extreme heat, and two, obviously moisture getting into places that it shouldn't. And rain, of course. Wind is a problem in some areas with some things. And then, of course, underwater. I had to put that as an adverse condition because there are, of course, underwater archaeologists out there. And at some point, we'll be talking about how do you use your tech in a zero or a low gravity zero atmosphere environment. It's called the moon. How do we use, there are 50-year-old sites on the moon now, right? So we're going to have to record those at some point.
Volunteer, will you?
Well, there's almost 50-year-old sites. Yeah. So I would definitely go up there. Paul, can you think of anything else, or have you had any experience with any of these? Because I know your recording environment is really more children are really the hazard you're dealing with. But
spilled coffee, spilled soda, spilled water, dropped down the staircase, that sort of thing. There are probably other things that have been spilled on them too that I don't want to know. But no, as an archaeologist, I broadened this out partially because I've never actually worked in winter conditions. I worked all over the Middle East, and we had to deal with desert and semi-desert. So I'm used to the hot side of this equation, the hot and dry, but not the cold, and not particularly the wet either. As a Minnesotan, I do know a thing or two about winter in general, though.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, that's good, and that's an interesting, an interesting contrast to make is in the fact that about summertime conditions and hot and dry and things like that. That's pretty typical from like an academic perspective, because a lot of times, obviously, they're going out into the field during the summer, not during the school year. But as cultural resource management archaeologists, we're obviously in the field all times of the year at any time in just about any weather condition. So I mean, I've heard of people digging up I heard of a project that was going on in New York. I think it was near Buffalo in the wintertime, and it was just something that had to get done. It was an excavation, and they had tents and like heaters for the ground and all kinds of stuff just to keep the ground from freezing while they were excavating, trying to do these things. So it's, you know, as a CRM archaeologist, I mean, you could be expected to work in just about anything, and your gear and yourself has to be expected to perform. So.
Yeah, and you're typically working on a shorter schedule, and it's not dictated by you; it's dictated by whoever's hiring you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're on an academic project, you might have a month or 2 months somewhere within the 2.5, 3 months of summer. So there might be a little bit more wiggle room there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you're being hired to work for a week on a, shovel testing something, that's your week. And if the weather sucks, you've got to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I'll never forget. I don't know what I would have done in this environment. Well, I know what I would have done now, but God, we worked in Ohio one time where the high for the whole time we were working there was like 5 degrees. And that was, that was for a brief period of time. And, of course, don't notice it when the high is only 5, as you know, being in Minnesota. That, I mean, you're bundled up at 5, just like you're bundled up at like 15 or 20. So you don't notice when it goes over 0 even usually. But it was just so miserable, and digging in that environment in that rock hard clay. But anyway,
that must have been tough.
Yeah, it was pretty crappy. So how would we have coped in the digital age? Because we didn't have tablets on that project. That was pre-iPad, and nobody had anything out there, and it was kind of pre-smartphone, really. I mean, I didn't have an iPhone yet. I think some smartphone type things were starting to come out. But it wasn't really a consideration. The biggest thing people were using still was like the GPS and the Trimble and stuff like that. And those will fail if they get too cold. So a lot of times you don't need the GPS or even the Trimble or something like that out 24 hours a day, all the time, the whole time while you're working. So put it in the vehicle or put it in your backpack. Better yet, you've probably got bigger coats on and stuff like that. If you can put it in an inner pocket, and this is one of the things I have down in clothing, is lots of pockets for the wintertime. So if you can put it on like an inner pocket where it's closer to your body, then the tech will stay at a slightly warmer temperature for usage, because these things will fail at low temperatures, and that should be listed in their instruction manuals at what temperatures they will fail at. And there's a little bit of wiggle room with that, of course, because it'll probably work at that temperature for a little while, but then either slow down, and a lot of that just breaks down to physics. Like batteries simply don't work as well. They don't generate enough power. Electrons don't move as fast when it's cold. So, it's we don't either. So we should be able to relate.
Yeah, I've seen. This is totally aside, but skiing with some friends a few years ago, we had our smartphones on us, and they were in pockets in our jackets. And I had a iPhone 5 at the time, and it worked fine for me the whole day that we were skiing. But my friends both had 6s, and they froze and they stopped. They shut down. Even though they were fairly close to our bodies, they weren't on inside pockets, but still just trying to use them.
Yeah.
The iPhone 6s couldn't, and the iPhone 5 could. And then when I upgraded to a 6 and we went skiing the next year, I had the exact same problem. I lost my phone that day too, or the use of it rather.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder if the part of that reason, and this would be applicable to an iPad or any sufficiently sized tablet as well, is there's a lot more metal on there, and that metal gets really cold. On the bigger ones, it's not full of battery, and the battery is not keeping it as warm as it probably could. Now, one of the things you can do is, of course, take one of those portable battery packs with you, and always have it plugged into the portable battery pack when you're not using it. Even if you don't need the charge, it'll keep the device warm, because the simple act of charging the battery or keeping the battery charged will keep the device internally warm, which is really what you need. If you think about a car in the wintertime that plugs in, really those block heaters, they're not heating like the rest of your car. They're just heating the fluids inside the engine block to keep it warm. So when you go to crank that thing over, it's not just, syrupy sludge in there. It's actually still fluid, and you can crank it over. Same thing with your battery. If you keep it internally warm, then your device should theoretically keep working. So that's one good way to do that. Another good way to do it, of course, is to put a case on your device, and not just like a back case like a lot of people have on their smartphones, but like a full wraparound case with a screen protector, because that just helps insulate it from the cold a little bit more. Not much, but a little bit more. Keeps that surface of it out from being out in the elements. And of course, a lot of problems people have with once you pull your tech out and it is working, and we're talking about capacitive touch screens here mostly, which is what nearly all things are these days. They're just the older screens were actually kind of a force touch sort of thing where you just touch it with anything and it'll work. But most screens are
touch.
Yeah, that's right, resistive touch. But now they're all capacitive touch, and you can't just like touch it with a piece of clothing or something. You need typically your finger, or famously when this first came out, somebody used a hot dog, I think, to do it. But which is pretty gross. But really, you just need, yeah, right. But really, you just need anything that has that conductivity that the screen can sense, and that's where you see a lot of gloves coming out these days, and in the last few years with conductive fingers. And usually, it's just your first finger, like your pointer finger, and your thumb. Some of the more expensive ones will have all the fingers, acknowledging the fact that you can put 10 fingers on an iPad. I don't know who's playing like the iPad piano or anything like that out in the wintertime with their gloves on, but yeah, right. But those you really got to try in the store, have your device with you, because some of those gloves are real crappy. And also, they don't work if the end of your finger is not contacting the conductive part on the inside of the gloves, then it's not going to work. So if they just put a little bit of conductivity in like the tip of the glove where you can see the glove probably looks different. If the fingers and the gloves are a little bit too big for your hands, or maybe you got short stubby fingers like I do, and the glove has a little space in the end, then it's not going to work. You've got to tighten up the glove onto your fingers before it'll actually work, which is a real pain in the ass. You can't type like that.
Some of them have a little button too, kind of at the fingertip instead of the conductive thread.
Yeah.
So that silvery tip that most of them have. Some of them have a little button to make that contact, so you can feel it from the inside that you're making contact. But it's also maybe less natural than the fabric conductive, because you've got this little nub pressing back at you in a way that's not normal. But it's another option. If one doesn't work for you particularly, take a look for a different style.
Yeah, and these days the like hunting sections of sports stores have really good gloves, because hunters need, whether they're bow hunters or using rifles or whatever, they need really good manual dexterity with their fingers. And as a byproduct, they've got really nice, solid, tight-fitting gloves that actually keep your hands really warm. And a lot of these are coming out with the conductive fingertips. So you might have to spend $20, $30, $40 on a decent pair of gloves, even more if you're looking at serious winter conditions. But that being said, you're still going to be able to use your hands, and they won't have frostbite. So how much is that worth to you? Another way to do this, before we talk about the really cool thing that's conductive thread, another way to do this is something that I just kind of fell into one time because I was trying to cobble two sets of gloves together because it got shockingly cold out one day. I had these really thin, I think they were Under Armour gloves. They were really super thin gloves. They had the conductive fingers on the ends of them. Paid some good money for them because they were like that wicking material, and they were just really awesome. But when it got super, super cold out and windy here in Nevada one time, they just weren't cutting it for me. They were letting too much air in. Well, I didn't have a set of like really thick winter gloves, but what I did have was a set of really nice fingerless gloves that had, my fingers went through the holes to make them fingerless, but then it also had this mitt that kind of went over the tips of my fingers. So I could have those covered while I wasn't doing anything. Well, I put those thin gloves on that had the conductivity, and then I put those mitted fingerless gloves over the top of those, and that kept my hands super warm when I didn't need to do anything, and I could just close it. And then when I needed to type, I could just open the mitt portion, and I still didn't have any skin exposed to the wind, which you'll get frostbite in a real second, and really quickly, yeah. And I just used the conductivity on the really thin gloves, but my fingers weren't out long enough. And it's really just the tips anyway. They weren't out long enough to be in any danger.
Yeah, for someone like me, that doesn't work. I've got Raynaud's, so I've got terrible circulation in my fingers. So when I go skiing, I've always got to have mittens on, because I need to have as much mass all together as possible. So if I want to use my phone when I'm skiing, out comes the phone, off comes the mitten. I do whatever I've got to do really quickly, and I shove it all back in just to keep them from freezing up. So, there's, depending if, I wouldn't recommend doing a lot of winter work if you've got Raynaud's, but there are different ways of dealing with it if you do.
Yeah, they got plenty of those gloves too. They have like a little pocket in them for putting those little heaters in there, like the little chemical heaters. So, oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh, so am I out here. I mean, you go from somewhat comfortable to just like shockingly uncomfortable really fast out here in Nevada. I noticed in the winter and the wind, because you get out of the truck and you're doing stuff and you're fine and you're comfortable, and it doesn't seem like there's a period of time because you're working and you're not thinking about it, and you all of a sudden go from I'm okay to I simply can't warm up. Like I'm just done. Like I can't. My fingers won't work. I can't warm up. I can't do anything. And you just gotta.
Well, especially if you've been working and you've built up a sweat, and then that gets cold, and then you're in trouble.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So. One of the other things you can do, if you've got a set of gloves that you like and they work with your fingers and they fit, but they don't have fingertips that are conductive, is just Google conductive thread. You can get this in a bunch of different places, and you can really just throw that stuff into a needle and then make your own little loops in the end of the glove and make your own conductive fingertips. I've never done it. I'll just say that right off, but I have heard people having varying success in actually doing that. And I think it really just depends on your skill in sewing that stuff into the end of your fingertips and making sure that you have constant contact between the thread and the ends of them. Yeah. So one thing I would probably do if I were going to do this, I wouldn't just put the thread in the fingertips. I would run a line all the way up the finger. So somewhere on my finger is actually connecting with that thread, because that's all that it needs to make a chemical electrical connection, is somewhere on your hand, your skin needs to touch that thread, that part of the thread that's also at the end of the finger touching the screen. As long as that's happening, then you're typing on the screen, and that should be okay. So all right, we are just about at the end of this segment, but I think we might as well stick on to stay on clothing here just a little bit, and some of the other kind of accessories, I guess, just for a second. I can't say enough about like proper tech management. Actually, a lot of people will just leave their stuff out, and like I mentioned with the phone, like we mentioned earlier, same thing with iPads and even other things. Take that thing when you're not using it, and don't set it on the ground. Don't set it with your other stuff if it's super, super cold out. Put it in an inner pocket. Put it in, a pocket of your vest or something like that. Put it in your backpack, for Christ's sake. Put it in something where it's out of the wind, it's out of the direct cold, and just be conscious about thinking about that. That's really all you have to do, is just be conscious of it. If you're not thinking about it, then it's like when we think about our clipboards. You wouldn't set down your clipboard full of paper in a windy condition. You're going to set it down so you've got a strap on the bottom of your stuff or something like that. Mm-hmm. We're used to thinking that way. Now we just have to think slightly differently with our tech. So. All right. Well, I think that'll be the end of this section. We'll come back and talk about some other things that you can do and some other alternatives. And then, of course, the last segment will be our app of the day. Back in a second. Hey, podcast fans, check out the ARC365 podcast at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365. That's ARCH365 for your daily dose of archaeology. Each episode is less than 15 minutes long, and we have some great guests recording about awesome archaeology. We also try to throw in some definitions and basic archaeological information. So, check out the 365 Days of Archaeology podcast only in 2017 at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365 today. Find us also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Music by typing ARC365 into the search. Now back to the show.
All right, welcome back. This is the Archaeotech podcast. Right now we're talking about tech in adverse conditions. Chris, a few minutes ago you mentioned the importance of cases. And I was wondering if there were particular cases that you've used that you like, things that you look for when you're buying cases, particularly for your iPads, but I guess also for phones and any other equipment too.
I used to use the OtterBox line of cases exclusively. I had an OtterBox case for my first iPad, had OtterBox for my first few phones that I had, and I really liked them. OtterBox had a real problem probably about 5 years ago with the kind of silicone wrapping that went around the plastic hard shell case that you put on your phone, in that the silicone would get real loose and weird, and it would just there would be gaps in it. It would start to kind of fall off. It was like, what the hell's going on here? They've since corrected all that, and OtterBox is way better. But as they were correcting that, I started exploring LifeProof cases. Yeah. And LifeProof is amazing. LifeProof, they're just like really slim. I mean, you take a big old phone, like I've got this 7 Plus here, and you put a LifeProof case on it. I mean, it's already a big phone. You put a case on it that's wraparound completely and submergible in the water. And that makes it an even bigger phone to put in your pocket. But LifeProof does a pretty good job of keeping that nice and tight and keeping that on there. It's good insulation for the phone. The screen protector is good that's on it. They have their LifeProof Nude series too, which actually doesn't have a screen protector, but it's got a good enough seal around the edge of your smartphone screen that you can use your screen without a screen protector on it, but it's still waterproof, which is kind of crazy. Yeah.
Is there anything that you look for differently in cases if you know you're going out in wintertime, say, versus any other time of the year?
Not really, because these cases seem to be good in all seasons. Like the LifeProof ones I have on my iPads now are really great for just about any time of the year. They're really awesome for summertime. I thought occasionally that they would overheat the iPhone or the tablet actually for the summertime because there's zero ventilation on it. And I think that's probably happening to some degree. But if you do some of the I guess orientation type stuff, like the way you situate yourself while you're recording and keep your tablet out of the sunlight, because the sunlight, the UV, we've talked about this before, interacts with the glass and just heats it up. It can actually do that in the wintertime too. It can be 30 degrees out and your iPhone, your tablet will overtemp if you leave it in a direct sunlight, especially here at high altitudes at 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet where the UV radiation is stronger. If you leave your screen out in the sunlight, it will overtemp. It's not really overtemping, but that's the indication it's getting.
Yeah, it's like leaving it on your dashboard
off.
Of your car because it's got a big glass screen right on the front.
Exactly. So that's what I like the LifeProof case for, is I don't need to switch that case when I go into a different weather situation. It seems to work all around best for everything. Now, something people should know, one of the reasons I think OtterBox's cases got better is one of those companies bought the other, but they maintained separate product lines, but they're now the same company. LifeProof and OtterBox, as of a couple years ago, they're now the same company. And I don't know if this is another reason for it or not, but LifeProof actually stopped selling some of their cases for the iPads. They just stopped providing them, and we actually had to look for another case manufacturer for the iPad 4, the iPad Mini 4. I think personally that they thought the Mini was going to be discontinued as a product line, which still might be the case. Apple hasn't updated it in 2 years. There hasn't been a new iPad Mini, and there's nothing on slate for this year either. So who knows? They may have just been, I guess looking out for themselves on that one. But one of the problems with those LifeProof and most of the OtterBox cases is 9 times out of 10 for the iPad size of case, all you can get is black. All you can get is like the dark black with maybe like a gray plastic or something like that. You might be able to get a black and dark gray or something.
Black is a problem if you're working in the heat, if you're working in the sun.
Exactly. And it's also a problem for visibility.
Yeah, which is...
I
was telling you at the break there that colors for me really are very important in the equipment. And I found this out as a surveyor in Jordan, and that all the equipment that we'd buy was high visibility yellow or high visibility orange. And for whatever reason, you put that stuff down in the sand in Petra, and it would just disappear. One year we went out in the field, we had some little walkie-talkies, consumer grade ones, whatever, just to see if they'd work. And for whatever reason, one of them was blue in the box of yellow ones. The yellow ones would go missing instantly. The blue one would always stand out against everything. So I always wonder about visibility with the equipment, especially if you're dealing with expensive equipment like tablets or like surveying equipment, GPSs and the like. If you can find something that's a good contrasting color for the environment you're working in, that's pretty important in my book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, high vis orange has always been a favorite out here. It just shows up really well. My favorite flagging tape, which honestly I would put this on my iPads if they sold it, is hot pink. I mean, that really bright pink, you can see that flagging tape from miles away, waving in the wind. And I'm thinking sure, people might have an issue with a hot pink iPad in the field, but screw it. If I can see it and I don't have to hunt for it around the site because I set it down. I mean, as CRM archaeologists, we've all been on a bigger site just surveying and flagging stuff, and you set down your backpack and maybe it's a lot of tall sagebrush or something like that, or you're in a forest or something. I've searched longer for my backpack than I have for artifacts before. I mean, just like, where the hell did I drop that thing? Because it just blends right in.
Well, especially if you're buying equipment at hunting stores and the like, a lot of that's going to be camouflaged anyhow.
Right? Yeah, not
No.
really the best thing for
One
it.
thing I always wonder about.
And
one thing that I always think about with the colors is that, every time I open up my web browser to Amazon, they show me ads for the Kindle Fires, and there's that whole line of ones for children. And they come in cases and they're bright colors and such. And I think that, if I were doing a project and I could support the software I had to run on one of those at $100 a pop, I would give that some serious consideration, because, they're already
nice.
Brightly colored and somewhat more bulletproof than a regular Kindle Fire, just because it's being marketed for kids.
Yeah, and $100 a piece, you could probably just donate to kids when you're done and buy new ones for the next project.
Yeah, if you do happen to drop that one and break it because there's no front screen protector, or you leave it someplace, you're out. But it's not a deal breaker. It's different than losing your brand new iPad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that's making me think of color too, we're going to jump our list just a little bit because I think it fits, is polarized sunglasses, and different sunglasses entirely. There are sunglasses out there, like you heard of blue blockers and things like that can actually affect your actual vision, and the way that you see the world and the color that you see the world in, which can be a huge problem if you're trying to describe or find things that are contrasting in the environment. There are some sunglasses out there that will make practically everything just wash out into the same couple shades of colors. And depending on how your eyes work too, some people might react to those differently. And then also polarized sunglasses. I had, what was it? I grabbed somebody's iPad one time and they had a knockoff case manufacturer on there. It wasn't one of the big major ones. They paid, one of those ones you pay like $20 for on Amazon or something. And I couldn't see their iPad screen at all, because the screen manufacturer, there was something in the screen protector on it that was causing a reverse polarization from the polarizing effect that the glass screen naturally has. So, like, for example, when I look at my iPad with my Ray-Ban polarized sunglasses, I can look at it in landscape view, but if I go to portrait view, it disappears, because you go 90 degrees out of phase from the polarization on your sunglasses, and it goes black. The screen literally goes black. And that's how polarization works. That's how they keep the sun, that UV radiation out of your eyes. Your lenses are polarized in an angle that normally people's heads are up and the sun is coming down into it. So that UV radiation is blocked by that polarization. But if you were to tilt your head sideways, your sunglasses are no longer polarized, but we don't typically walk like that.
Film photographers used to use that I used to have one of these, as a linear polarizing filter for my camera, for my SLR.
Yeah.
And you could turn it one way and the clouds in the sky would not, they just disappear into the sky. You turn it another way, the clouds would jump out at you.
Yeah.
So you could use it to highlight different things. This is back in the film days, before we could really edit the output of our cameras very easily. Not like nowadays. So I don't know if people are still using polarizing filters like that, but it can be useful.
It can be useful, but like I said, you got to watch for it when you have a case or something on your device and it's summertime and you're using sunglasses or whatever, because that one case at that person's iPad that I used for a minute, I couldn't see anything because like I said, the screen was, they were hitting both polarization. If you were wearing unpolarized sunglasses, you could see it, but if you had polarized lenses on, they were covering both polarization angles, so I couldn't see anything, which is crazy. All right, so one thing that we did mention in the first section just briefly as a method of warming your device was battery, having it plug into an external battery, which we've talked about on this show before. But I want to bring it up again in the context of this show, just to recognize that everything from, batteries are really particular things, just like electronics. They have a sweet spot for temperature operating range. You get above that or you get below that and you decrease their efficiency, or you risk damaging the battery itself. So not only the battery inside the device, but any external batteries you might have as well. So in any condition for weather, you probably always want to have, just because it's easy to have and it doesn't cost you much and it's nice to just put it in your backpack and have it, but have some sort of external rugged battery. Just keep in mind that if you don't buy like a rugged one with sealed up ports or anything like that you're going to have to put it in something, because if your backpack gets wet or something like that and those ports get wet, you'll probably just destroy that battery real super quick. So but like I said in the first segment, it can be also used to warm up your device too if you just keep it plugged in and keep it going. Another thing that in the line of cases, going back to those a little bit, that will help keep it clean is keeping keeping lenses clean. Now, a lot of your newer cases these days, they want to actually cover the lenses on the backs of your devices. Some of the older ones did, which was a real bad idea, they realized. And I would always punch that little lens cover out from the OtterBox ones. But now they mostly come with the lenses completely exposed because people are taking really good photography, really good pictures with their tablets and their smartphones, and they don't want that impeded by some sort of case on there that could either damage the lens or just cause an unwanted filter, basically. So yeah, looking out for condensation in your lenses. Not really a big deal with like inside of the lenses on a smartphone and a tablet, but on the outside for sure. A lot of people, I've seen them, I've done it myself, where you pull out the camera and you go to take a picture and you can't really see it on the screen that well for some reason, but then you go look at the picture later and you're like, man, that lens was dirty. And you don't even realize it because it's on the back and it's not like a older camera lens where it comes out or something like that.
You look at on the screen in the sun so you don't have the full range of colors and contrast.
Oh my God. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you're just kind of hoping for the best, really. You always have like a little lens thing or something, and if you're going to take a series of pictures, go in there and wipe it off a little bit, breathe on a little bit. It's still just a lens. You don't want to ground some dirt into it, but breathe on a little bit maybe and wipe that off.
Are you still bringing like SLR cameras in the field, or are you just relying entirely on the ones on the devices nowadays?
I'm mostly relying on the ones on the devices because the agencies aren't requiring any more than that. But there are some caveats to that because some people still require black and white film for structure photography,
really?
For architectural photography. Yeah, oh. It's still because of the archivability of it.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, so they're still requiring that. And if you are taking an SLR out there, yeah, you've got to worry about dust in your mechanical operating, like like the operation of your focus ring and stuff like that. So
yeah, and double that if you're actually changing lenses when you're in the field.
Oh yeah, I mean when you were working in the Middle East, when you were working over there, I mean it was all SLRs, I'd imagine, or not SLRs, but DSLRs.
Yeah, it was all, no, it was before DSLRs. We're still shooting film. So I would typically take 2 camera bodies with me in the field, a bunch of lenses, but I wouldn't change them in the field. I'd change them before. And so one would be loaded up with color slide film, and the other would be with black and white. And that's what we had to shoot with, and wouldn't change wouldn't change the lenses in the field just because of the dust. And every now and then we'd have to get everything and toss them into plastic bags because a dust storm would blow up. And and that fine desert dust gets into everything, and by the end of a field season, none of your zippers work, and a lot of the things with knobs and rings and such make an awful grinding noise when you move them. So, so a big part of what we had to do actually in taking care of our tech, and I'm sure it's still applicable, even though there's fewer moving parts nowadays, is what do you do after the field? How do you maintain your equipment?
Yeah, and that's incredibly important. And depending on the environment you're working in, you really should be taking things apart that you can safely do. Even like on tablets and smartphones, take your case off at the end of a 10-day session and clean it out, because these things, they say they're completely impenetrable sometimes, but stuff managed to find a way in, especially that fine dust like you're talking about. And as it gets in there, it might not be causing any immediate damage, but it could be slowly grinding its way at damaging something, maybe on your screen or something like that. So you got to watch that. Plus, blowing out your, even if you just use your breath or a can of compressed air, but you got to be careful, blowing out your portholes on like your phones and your tablets and stuff like that to make sure that you're not getting anything ground into those fine little tabs in there. I just had a problem on vacation where I didn't even know what happened. I got some minor salt spray from when we went out on a boat into the bottom of my iPhone 7 Plus. And I actually took this thing underwater one time accidentally. It was in the shorts pocket when I went swimming. and it was underwater for like 4 minutes. And before I realized it, I just pulled it out and nothing ever happened. It was fine. They say it's water resistant. It's not supposed to be waterproof, but it was fine in that circumstance. But 3 seconds of salt spray on the bottom port here, and now my force touch doesn't work. My screen is mostly broken, and my button stopped working a little bit too. I managed to restore a lot of the functionality just through some software restores and cleaning it up a little bit, but luckily I'm replacing this phone in like a week and a half because it's totally toast from a little bit of salt spray, because salt is electrically conductive. So it got on the little power port down there and just played havoc with everything. Water itself won't necessarily do it, but you throw salt in the mix and it's all over with.
Well, that actually, here's a little bit of a maintenance tip for people. If you ever do spill something on your laptop, unplug it right away. If you can remove the battery, unplug the battery, shut the thing down as quickly as you can, and then don't touch it for at least 3 days. Damp it out. Again, this happens to us at school all the time. And, once a month, there's some kid that says, well, I spilled some water on it and it worked. And then it stopped working 3 days later. It's like, well, yeah, because it took that long, but the water's conductive, especially if they do something like coffee or soda. And yeah, after a little bit, it's going to ruin it. So if you do spill something on it, just shut everything down, power it off in every way possible, and then let it dry. Be patient about it and let it sit for at minimum 3 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's good advice for all electronics. I mean, most of the things that the biggest thing that will ruin a piece of electronics that gets wet, whether it's from humidity or water, is that water causing a connection between things that shouldn't have a connection. And if you simply just let it dry out, and I've actually heard, I haven't done any research on this, I've heard that the putting it in rice thing is actually not good.
Yeah, it doesn't actually work. No,
it doesn't actually work. And then it puts a lot of fine rice dust inside your device if you're like putting it in a bowl of rice. So just let it sit.
If you do feel the need to put it in something and you have a lot of those silica gel packets, you could put it in a jar with silica gel packets. That will work.
Yeah.
I've never tried it myself, but people have told me
it makes sense.
I believe them.
Yeah, it makes sense. Totally. And those are sealed up. They still suck in moisture, but they're sealed up because obviously that little fine silica will get all over the place as well. So, all right. Well, we're just about done with this segment. Let's jump ahead a little bit here. Paul, what do you do when all your tech stops working? And that's weather related. It's temperature related. It's something like that. What do you do when it just all stops? What do you think?
Well, I guess it really depends on how long you expect to be in the field. I mean, is it a blip? Are you dealing with a rainstorm that's moving through? Has everything overheated and you're not going to be able to run it, or are you going to be able to run it again in an hour if you let everything cool down? I think it's very dependent on what's going on. It also depends on how reliant you are on that particular piece of tech. I mean, are you going to be able to? Your tablet has stopped working. Are you going to be able to continue recording on paper? Depends on the project. I mean, it does imply then a certain amount of work afterwards. But I would think that for most projects, if you have the forms that you need in paper form as well as in electronic form, you might at least have a backup plan then for when things all stop working as expected. Have you ever had to stop in the middle of a project or sooner than you expected because of the weather?
Oh yeah, all the time. And a lot of times it's been because weather was moving in and getting worse, and we were afraid of being able to get out of where we were. Or if we're walking or something like that and we're a long ways from the truck and we see a system coming in, or it's just the weather's just getting too bad and we need to be able to actually make it to our vehicle to get out. Yeah, we've had to cut out a lot of times, but I agree with what you're saying too. You got to see what your remaining day is. And something I was thinking about while you were talking about switching to paper, you have to really consider for yourself, like if it's 9 o'clock in the morning and you're switching to paper, that probably is better to just go home, because if you're going to record three or four more sites for the day, you're creating 12 to 16 hours more work for yourself in the back office. Where if you just went home, then you're losing some work, but you're not creating more work for yourself. I think it's actually costing you less if you just go home and say this isn't going to work. And also, I see tech failing for weather reasons, and usually it's temperature reasons, whether it's too low or too hot. I see that as kind of a canary in the coal mine sort of thing. We're a little bit too macho out in the field, and we're like, oh, let's just keep on going. And yeah, when it's all clipboards and pencils, there's nothing telling us it's too hot out here. We're ignoring our bodies. Our crew chiefs are saying, let's do another mile. Let's do this. Let's do that. And we're like, okay. But all your freaking electronics are dying. These things are built to tolerances to work within normal human operating temperatures. So you can use them in most conditions. When your tech starts to fail, maybe you got to look at that and say, hey, maybe it's too hot or too damn cold for us to be out here too, if the tech has given up.
Yeah. It's going to be a day in the lab now.
Right? There's always something else you can do. If you're out on survey,
definitely.
Yeah, you can. If you're out on survey, you can just go somewhere else and just keep walking and doing some more survey, record your sites later, something like that. If you're on an excavation, maybe you can do some gear maintenance. Maybe you can do some other stuff that doesn't require you to fill out level forms. I don't know, clear out another section, do some, try to figure out, or always have a back plan for some things you can do to make up for that. So, All right.
Back
Anything
to
else?
No, sounds like back to that the other episode where we were talking about planning, what to do when your tech fails.
Exactly. So, yeah, think of it as I like the canary in a coal mine analogy. Your tech starts to fail. Start to look at your environment and say, should I be here?
Yeah, I think that's a good decision. That's good advice.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for the regular part of the show. Come back in just a minute for the App of the Day segment.
This network is supported by our listeners. You can become a supporting member by going to arcpodnet.com/members and signing up. As a supporting member, you have access to high-quality downloads of each show and a discount at our future online store, and access to show hosts on a members-only Slack team. For professional members, we'll have training shows and other special content offered throughout the year. Once again, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support the network and get some great extras and swag in the process. That's arcpodnet.com/members.
All right, we're back for the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 65, and this is our App of the Day segment. And today we're going to cover a couple different apps, and we'll start with mine. And mine is Just Press Record. And I looked up in our system here, and if you haven't gone over to arcpodnet.com/archaeotech and use the search field on the right, I actually used that search field today to see if I'd talked about this app before. And it turns out I did, and I'll link to that in the show notes. It was on an Internet of Things episode 26, but it wasn't an App of the Day segment. It was just in the regular segment, and so I only talked about it briefly. But I want to talk about Just Press Record a little more because it's really applicable to the winter tech problem and the summer tech problem and other things like that. Because one of the things that you can do to interact with your technology a little better is to automate some things to where you don't need to hit as many buttons. And one of the ways to do that, if you say it gets too cold or too windy or something, your stuff is still working, but you just don't want to type right now. You're willing to just transcribe and type later. You can just record it. And there's an app for iOS called Just Press Record. It's on Apple Watch and all the mobile devices. And I think they even have a computer one, but I'm not sure what you'd use that for. But either way, it's a simple big red button that you just hit record on, and it just simply starts recording your voice. And then once you get within cell service, if you're not already, if it's a really long recording, it won't do transcription. You can force transcription, I think, but it will try to transcribe what you said on definitely the several minute long ones. So if you're just recording feature descriptions or something like that, it will actually transcribe those, and you can copy and paste that into a document, reformat it, and you're done. So it's a really good way. Like I have it on my Apple Watch, and it's in one of my complications, they call it. It's just a button in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and if I want to record something real fast, I just hit that. It doesn't take me to another app where I have to hit record. It doesn't do anything. It just opens the app and instantly starts recording. And it's the same way on the phone. And I love that because it's super fast. Usually I want to use it when I'm in the car and I have a thought or have an idea or something I want to think about later. I'm not going to sit there and type that out. And I'm not going to use Siri to do it. We all know how well that works. So I'm just going to hit Just Press Record and then record what I need to do. And then the other cool thing about that is it connects via iCloud to your entire iCloud account. So once you're done with your recording, it instantly uploads to your iCloud account, so it's available everywhere that you have access to that iCloud account. So if you had like a company iCloud account, let's say, it would upload to the company iCloud account, and somebody in the office could even review that recording right now, review the transcription, and then, do some stuff with that. And it's a nice way to maybe send stuff back and forth or whatever. But it's a good way to record stuff really fast, really easily, with no complications, no file names, no nothing like that, and just get right into it. And you don't have to pull your fingers out of your gloves for too long if it's super cold to get it going. You can probably start it. I've actually pushed it with my nose before when I had gloves on, like just hit the upper left-hand corner of my watch with my nose and then started the recording. And then because I can just push one of the buttons on the side to stop the recording and make it go away. So it's a really handy tool for any weather condition, but I think it's going to be really handy for the wintertime and things like that, and winter recording, and when you don't want to touch too much stuff, but you still want to be able to record, especially if you have an Apple Watch. Like I said, it works on the phone and it works on a tablet, but it's really, really fun on an Apple Watch. I think it's kind of designed for that, really. It came out before the Apple Watch did, but when the Apple Watch came out, they hit their stride with it. So that's it's a really simple App of the Day segment, but it's really effective too, and I think incredibly useful. What do you think about Paul?
Yeah, it sounds pretty good. It sounds like I'll have to take a look at it because it does sound like a really streamlined, straightforward little utility. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of in the same vein. It doesn't have any particular application for adverse weather conditions, but it's a one-trick pony that does what it does very simply and very well. And that program is called Scannable. It's available on iOS and on Android. It's made by Evernote, and it integrates with Evernote really nicely. And what it is a little camera app. You launch it. Say you have a piece of paper, a receipt, a form, notes that you've taken. You just lay it down on the table, launch the app, aim it at the page. It recognizes the boundaries, snaps a picture, and then gives you the option to do a little bit of image editing if you need to bump up the contrast, delete it if it didn't take a good picture, and then upload it either directly into your Evernote or send it via email, save it to your camera roll, probably text it. I'm not sure how many millions of different ways you can get it out of Scannable, but it integrates so nicely with Evernote, which of course isn't surprising because it's made by them. I use it very heavily. I always recommend this particular program when people come to me with a new phone and saying, hey, what kind of an app do you really recommend I use? I say, take a look at this one because it can make a lot of things that you otherwise wouldn't do or would want to do but haven't because it'd be a little cumbersome to break out a flatbed scanner, for example. You just quickly take a picture. If you have multi-page documents, it assembles them into a multi-page PDF. If it takes a picture of a page and it doesn't crop it properly, you can go back in and it's got a really cool like loop view to it. So it'll show you the bounding box of the page, and you can drag each corner around to fit where the actual corners of the page are. It will rectify the image. So if you've taken it at an angle, it squares it off for you. Really, really handy. I use it I use it in a number of different ways, but mostly when I go to a lecture, I like taking notes on paper. Too many years of schooling before we had tablets and the like. And though I type quickly enough, my notes are bits of scribbles and diagrams and arrows and all sorts of weirdness that only I can read. But I want to keep it in an electronic form because I don't particularly like paper except for taking the notes initially. So at the end of a lecture, I'll just come back, set my lecture notes out on the desk, fire up Scannable, take a picture, load it up into Evernote, where I have one of my notebooks is called Lectures, and that's where it all is. I do the same with the AIA board meeting notes, and occasionally with receipts. Definitely use it when there's some sort of legal document that I need. Again, much easier than breaking out a flatbed scanner, scanning it into my laptop and uploading it like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I actually didn't know that Evernote had this as a standalone application. So if you don't want an Evernote account, or if you don't want, to deal with Evernote for some reason or another, you're just not into it, but you want a good document scanner, this seems like a great idea. I have never used Scannable, but I have, because I use Evernote pretty extensively and I scan a lot of stuff with Evernote, and it just, like Paul said, all the same features are there. And one thing I noticed that it does if you're scanning it right into Evernote, and I'm not sure if Scannable does this on its own or it needs another application like Evernote specifically to make this work, but it will OCR your documents in most cases too, which means it will recognize the text on there, and that text on the document that you just scanned becomes searchable. And it becomes selectable as well if you're going to copy and paste it. And it's not the best for like older documents.
Yeah, which is wonderful when you've got a form or a receipt or something. Doesn't work at all with my handwriting. But I'm okay with that.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah, mine either. So, but yeah, it looks like it works great, and it looks like it says on the App Store thing here that there's a ScanSnap Evernote Edition scanner, multi-page documents, and it looks like Scannable will work with that as well. I'm not sure if it links to that, and then the stuff can scan into Scannable, and then through Scannable you can share it out and bring it wherever you need to go. Not sure about that, but another option for you. So seems like a pretty cool tool.
Yeah, it's good to have
something
options.
like this. Yeah, something like this. I think a document scanner is actually a really good thing to have in the field from a smartphone standpoint, because we can relate this to weather, because I don't know how many times I've seen somebody's clipboard that they set on the ground be totally destroyed by a dust devil that went by, opened the clipboard and took all the paper and scattered it about the desert. So if you take, most crew chiefs, if you're working with paper, you'll distribute the forms, or your crew will already have the forms. You'll record a site. At the end of recording the site, depending on how your crew chief operates, some will just say, keep those forms. But most crew chiefs, I used to do this too. I would say, give me all your forms. I would paper clip those together and then put those on the left side of my clipboard, whereas on the right side, I had all my blank forms. So then we'd, file those when we got home. But quickly snapping a picture of each one of those into your phone is probably a really solid idea.
Well, there you go. There's
the
use case for the adverse weather. Your equipment is starting to die. You're not at a good place to stop, but you've got to stop soon. You switch to paper. That's right. Finish up what you're doing. Snap it into Scannable so you can upload it to Evernote as soon as possible. You've got now you've got a paper copy, a digitized copy of that paper, and you can go home feeling reasonably secure that you've captured what you needed to.
Yeah, and if you're in cell service when you do that, then you've also satisfied a lot of the archival requirements of data, which means it's now saved off-site in cloud servers. It's now somewhere else. So you don't have to worry about, okay, sure, you just scanned all this stuff, but then you set your phone on your clipboard and both of them fell into a mine shaft. Sure, that sucks, but it's happened. It sucks, but now all your documents are also in the cloud and you have access to them, and you didn't lose all that information from recording that site. So yeah, sounds really good. See, we related it right back.
Well done.
Nice. Okay, well, we do have some other ideas for podcasts on this. There's always stuff we can talk about, but as usual, if you've got anything you want us to talk about or discuss, or you have any questions, send an email off to chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. You can comment on this episode or any of the episodes on Facebook or wherever you found it. You can also send us a tweet. I'm at ArchPodNet or at ArchaeoWebby, ARCHEO. And Paul, what's your Twitter handle?
Lugal, Lugal. So at Lugal.
There you go. So feel free to tweet us or message us or do whatever you got to do, and let us know what you think about these episodes and if you have any suggestions for future episodes. So I think with that, we'll hope Paul can stay warm in this windy, sudden fall in New York.
Yeah, it's okay. It's just New York. It's not Minnesota. I may get out a winter jacket.
Nice. All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks, Chris.
And we'll see you guys next week. That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.